One of the last time I met Prabhupada.
For those of you that don't remember who this is Hare, otherwise known as Prajapati. He used to live in the temple in Burnett Street, St Kilda, with Hare and Gary and so many others.
One of the last time I met Srila Prabhupada was actually in here. Those days in 1975, I wanted to see Prabhupada badly, face to face. And I was not able to have any opportunity because in the temple, as you know now, in the temple in Dank Street, to go to Prabhupada, you have to go through that stairway, and there's always somebody up there, to say, no, he's too busy, you cannot see him, So that was not possible to see him. But then I find out that he comes to walk in Botanical Garden on that Pacific Day, so I was hiding somewhere around the bush somewhere. And as soon as I saw Prabhupada walking, I just dashed it. And then I greeted him, he greeted me. I asked a question. Don't ask me the answers to this, but I asked a question. But I think he got his attention. He says, I asked him, in the book you have mentioned that there are devas, demigods, devas and demons, What happened to people like me who is in between, what happened? where do they fit in, So he tried to give me an answer, but I wanted to explain it here right now. But the very next morning, in Prabhupada room, he called for me. So that's when I have my face-to-face.
This is one of my favorite memories. That we were in Penang. Prabhupada came to Malaysia. And we were driving to the airport, and the host was a member of the Birla family. He had an American car that drives on the left.
Right.
Prabhupada was sitting on the right passenger seat, and there were 3 disciples in the back seat, and I was sitting right behind Prabhupada. But I was feeling kind of down because I made some mistakes that few days, and I thought I don't do any useful service. I'm a complete fool. I don't do anything useful. And then I just offered obeisances to Prabhupada in my mind. Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Vashtaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Dinamane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gaurani Pacharani Nivesesha Srinivadi Paschatade Shatani. In my mind, silently. And Prabhupada turned around and he looked at me and said, all good work is done as soon as we offer obeisances. Wow.
I wasn't here when Srila Prabhupada was here, but I've heard this on the DVDs of Srila Prabhupada in Melbourne at the Botanical Gardens. And there was there was a man on the grass, and he was practicing golf. And Prabhupada said, "What is that man doing?" And he said, the devotee said, "He's practicing golf, Prabhupada." And he said, "What's golf?" He said, they hit a ball around a big oval, and the ball's got to go in the little hole." And Prabhupada actually had tears in his eyes, and he said, "What a waste of a life."
Just when I saw a moga come up, I have a really good hat story. Vijayana, the one that Prabhupada actually whacked with the cane, and we decided that Prabhupada needed to have a really warm hat for the morning walk. So we went into the city, and we couldn't find a saffron hat anywhere, but we bought a yellow hat with a pom-pom. You've probably seen, there's lots of pictures. Prabhupada wore it at San Francisco Ratha Yatra. It's quite famous, lots of pictures of him with this hat. But we walked into the room, and we gave Prabhupada the hat, and it had a pom-pom on the top. And Prabhupada put it on, and he put it on just like this, and it stood like about right up, like 12 inch into the air with this pom-pom on top. And he goes, yes, and I go, and it looked sort of crazy. So I said, Prabhupada, you get the hat and you bring it down like this. So Prabhupada gets the hat and he brings it down, he goes, like this? I said, yes, Srila Prabhupada. He goes, very nice. Just when I saw a Moga arrive with the hat up, it just reminded me of Prabhupada.
This is just a short story. I actually only went on one morning walk with Prabhupada, and that was in Vrindavan when I was a new Bhakti, because I was always doing service in the morning. But my godbrother passed on this very beautiful story about Prabhupada on his way to the Melbourne Botanical Gardens for his morning walk. I think it was 1974, and all the devotees were preparing for the Rath-yatra so that no one was going on the morning walk. And there was the driver, and there was Srila Prabhupada in the back seat with my godbrother Hare. And it was during peak hour traffic, driving along this main road here onto Botanical Gardens. And my godbrother was thinking, oh, look, I'm so fortunate. I'm sitting here with my spiritual master. I'm, look at all these mudhas. They're rushing to work, they're so foolish, but I'm here with my spiritual master. I'm so fortunate. Thinking like that. And then Srila Prabhupada was looking out the other window, and then he turned to Chidahari, and there were tears coursing down Srila Prabhupada's cheeks. And he turned to Chidahari and said, how can they be saved? So it's a really wonderful story to illustrate Prabhupada's incredible compassion. One contrast with, a disciple thinking, oh boy, I'm really lucky, look at them, they're so foolish. And then Srila Prabhupada, all he's thinking of is how can they be saved? And feeling such compassion that tears were actually falling from his eyes. Jai Prabhupada.
Yeah, it's true. Bring Prabhupada across the lawn and underneath the street.
Srila Prabhupada was very grave. The Nectar Devotion Bhakti Samhita Sindhu defines grave as it's very difficult to perceive the depth of his consciousness or the depth of his thinking. So in Melbourne, Prabhupada would go on morning walks, and so many devotees, everyone who was invited would come, and sometimes some who weren't exactly invited would come. But sometimes Prabhupada really liked to walk alone. And in Japan, one time, he would walk alone because the reason why Prabhupada started taking morning walks was on the recommendation of a doctor in New York perhaps in 1966, after Prabhupada suffered a heart attack. And till that time, Prabhupada didn't take morning walks, but after that time, Prabhupada started walking every day, and it was for his health. But it really turned into, because Prabhupada was such a surrendered preacher, the morning walks very often turned into lively debates and lively talks. But sometimes Prabhupada really just liked to be internal and quietly just walk along. One time, I guess I went on morning walks with Prabhupada in quite a few countries, maybe 2 in Australia, in Fiji, in Mayapur, and also one time, many days in Japan. So in Japan in 1972, the devotee Sudama Prabhu was staying in a suburb, not a precinct of Tokyo called Asakawa-cho, which is very, very far into practically a forest. And it was such an old house that we were staying in, that the devotees were staying in. And the windows, and it was so cold in Tokyo at that time, and the windows were made out of paper, yes. So you can imagine how cold everything was when you have windows made out of paper. And it was so cold. And Prabhupada, in Mangalarti, I had traveled with Prabhupada from Hong Kong, and he was sitting on the Vyasa-san, and as you were chanting, the breath would be able to be seen. It was so cold. And I was, Samsara Dharma, and Prabhupada just looked at me and said, "It is so cold, is it not?" So sometimes there's a tendency to think of Prabhupada as, I would call, over-mythologizing Prabhupada. I'm not one to be able to comment on exactly what his consciousness was, but he was so fixed in service to his Guru Maharaj and Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Sri Radha and Krishna, that whether he liked cold, whether he didn't like cold, whether he liked to walk alone, whether he didn't like to walk alone, he just surrendered fully with such incredible devotion to what was pleasing to his masters. But one time in Japan, on one of the walks, early during his visit, there were quite a few devotees there, and after one walk where everyone went on when just a few of us went on the walk, then after that, everyone decided that yes, well, naturally, wouldn't you also want to come on a walk with Prabhupada? So everyone who was there came, perhaps 15 devotees, maybe perhaps even a little bit more, came on the morning walk. And then everyone was enthusiastic, and the mood was like, it wasn't the kind of sober mood that Prabhupada was in the mood for at that time. And one devotee, his name was Sanjay Prabhu, he brought a big tape recorder like a, I don't know what the proper name for it is, but a ghetto blaster. And he put on the Govinda prayers, Govinda, and Prabhupada started walking. And suddenly, Prabhupada just turned around. So this is an example of Prabhupada exerting his desire, but in such a gentle way. He just turned around and said, Chanakya Pandit said that when you eat alone. When you study in twos. And when you walk in threes. And then he just turned around and kept walking. It was Prabhupada was very, very, very subtle. I mean, when he was sitting on the Vyasa-san, he was always in this mood of, he was the Acharya, the Founder-Acharya of ISKCON. He was protecting the Siddhanta of the Gaudiya Vaishnava Siddhanta. And he was like a lion sitting on the Vyasa-san. And but other times he had so many different moods. And I can't remember how many devotees were brave enough to walk with Prabhupada on that very morning walk. But the next day there were only about 2 or 3 of us, for sure. No one dared that one. And Prabhupada, and it was so interesting on these Japan walks, very much stick in my mind, because Prabhupada wasn't talking at all. He wasn't speaking very much, and sometimes he would stop and say something. One time, and it was so touching, because all you could hear as he was walking on the gravelly type of Japan road that was very much like a wilderness, sort of up a mountain, was the sound of his cane. And I think there are tapes, some recordings where you can just hear the sound of Prabhupada's cane. And because it was Prabhupada's cane, every touch of that cane to the earth it was touching the heart. It's quite, you could say mystical, or you could say, there was nothing superficial at all about Prabhupada. And there are so many books written about Srila Prabhupada, but the reality is you could, like Kaviraj Goswami says about Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, you could have written a book about every day of Prabhupada's, because everything was so subtle, everything he did was meaningful, everything was purposeful, and everything was elegant. That's the word I was looking for. Everything was so well done and elegant. Of course, there are so many things we could say, but so many little things that were very, very meaningful and showed Prabhupada's full devotion and commitment. Well, anyway, on one of these morning walks where he wasn't speaking in Japan, and just the sound of the cane was there, and then suddenly he stopped, because I had asked him a question, and we were talking about when we were in Kyoto. We had been talking about, he was challenging the theory of evolution, and there was a part of me. So many arguments he was giving, but there was a part of me at that time wasn't fully convinced, because I was trained in school to think that we evolved and to think this was reality. And so anyway, so I had spoken to Prabhupada about the principle of evolution being, he would speak about chance. There's no chance, but I said they don't talk about chance, they talk about change, that everything mutates, and it must mutate and change in the material world, biologically and everything. So we were talking about change and chance. And then on this morning walk, just as we were, there were hills on the right, and there were so many trees perfectly lined up on the hills. And then suddenly, because when you asked him a question when he spoke, it was coming from a place that was it was unfathomable. It was ununderstandable. It was so deep and so devotion filled, but it was always completely clear. So he would, so he just stopped and he just pointed to the trees. All on the hill, and each one of them was, of course, as trees do, facing the sun. So he said, if everything changes by chance at least one of these trees would be facing away from the sun, if that was the principle. And that was it. And he let me work out all the rest. Srila Prabhupada.
As women in the movement, we didn't really get to go on many morning walks with Srila Prabhupada. I went on 2 morning walks with Srila Prabhupada, and probably I would say that this would be shared with most of the women who got to go on morning walks. We were kind of Prabhupada was surrounded with the men devotees, and we were kind of running along trying to hear, you know.
Yes.
So we didn't really kind of have too many exchanges on the morning walks, but I was just going to tell a couple of things about in Bombay when Srila Prabhupada was going out for a morning walk one morning. We would clean his rooms while he was gone, and one day we were all streaming along at 6 a.m. as Prabhupada left with the men devotees. We had our buckets and our mops and this and that, and you know, we came across Srila Prabhupada, so we all, you know, hit the floor and offered obeisances, hit the ground, and Srila Prabhupada said, "All glories to the gopi devotees." That was nice. You must have heard Srila Prabhupada's morning walks in Bombay, Juhu Beach. There were these gentlemen that used to meet up with Srila Prabhupada every day, Dr. Patel, and there were lawyers and doctors and, you know, businessmen. And they actually really loved Prabhupada, but they certainly didn't have pure devotional service like Srila Prabhupada. So, you know, there were many, and they used to argue with Prabhupada, and the devotees used to get really annoyed because they'd always be arguing with Srila Prabhupada. So one day when they came back from the morning walk, the devotees were like really happy, the men devotees, and they were laughing when they came into the temple, and they were saying, "Srila Prabhupada really got them, Prabhupada really got them." Anyway, it turned out that they were kind of supporting some Mayavadi Acharya, and Srila Prabhupada was, you know, explaining why he wasn't actually teaching pure devotional service, but, you know, they just would argue and argue. And in the end, Prabhupada stopped and he said, "I kick on his face! I kick on his face!" And after that, Prabhupada introduced that to stop this business, the devotees would read Krishna book on the morning walks in Bombay, Juhu Beach.
Hare Krishna. Just a short mention about the morning walks in Australia. It's been observed by others that it wasn't easy to get on those walks. When Prabhupada came, he was here for a week. It wasn't like anybody could just go out and meet up, you know, with Prabhupada on his walk. We were strictly controlled. So a few people were designated every day. All right, you're on the morning walk for today, like that. So it wasn't really easy to get out there. But later on, after the temple opening here in May, then the next big event was going to be Rath-Yatra. And we started building the carts in the backyard. And then we got news that Prabhupada had approved having the Rath-Yatra in the summertime rather than the winter. Melbourne summer instead of winter. So we were told after we'd constructed them to take them back down and store them away. So by that time I kind of started feeling that it was time for me to move on from Australia. And I moved to Vrindavan. So I'd been there for the opening, and then we came back to Australia. So I had it in my heart that I really wanted to go back and serve in Vrindavan. So I went there in early August. As soon as I walked through the door, Bhaktivedanta was there. He was still back to Richard at that time. He grabbed me. He took me into Akayananda Swami's room. He was the temple president. He said, "I've found our new temple commander." I'd literally just got off the train from Australia, and I got appointed the temple commander. So anyway, one of the duties of the temple commander was keeping the temple clean. And Prabhupada had us, you know, under a rigorous routine, so that immediately after Mangalarati, we had to clean the temple. Then again, after the noon arati, when the temple was closed, we had to go in and clean it again. And then again at night time, when the last arati was over, then we had to go in and clean it again. So one of the things was that Prabhupada would come out at dawn, and he would walk up the side pathway up to the front gate. Of course, there was no samadhi in those days. It was all open. And there was a pathway, so Prabhupada had complained a couple of times the pathway was not cleaned when he came out for his morning walk. So that became the first duty of the day. So immediately after Mangalarati, we get out there, you know, with the, what do you call those rubber strips? Squeegees. We get out there with the squeegees and buckets of water. We throw water all over the pathway and then run up and down like madmen trying to get everything clean before Prabhupada stepped out and walked down the pathway. So we were doing that fairly successfully. So one morning, Prabhupada came out, and as he got to the front gate, there was this devotee called Vishal. So those of you that know Vishal, he's a very kind of eccentric person. So he got this idea that as Prabhupada was going to, you know, exit the temple, he would read verses from the Bhagavatam, you know, out loud, you know, like the Pandits you read about in the Krishna book and stuff like that. So he had this... Anyway, so this particular morning, Vishal stood at the gateway. Now, when we cleaned the pathway, we would just, you know, brush the water off the edge of the path. So at the front gate there was some small puddles of water from where we cleaned. So Vishal was standing there. He didn't realize he was standing in a puddle. And Prabhupada came up to the gate on his morning walk. There were just a few of us there. And Vishal started, you know, doing his recitation from the Bhagavatam. So he started saying that we think that we have met your grace by the will of providence, you know, famous verse. As soon as he got to that, Prabhupada stopped. He said, it is by the will of providence that you do not see it is dirty. And Vishal looked down, he's standing in the water. Prabhupada said, there's water. Now if you walk, it will go into the temple. So he said, oh, I'm very sorry, your grace. I didn't have the eyes to see it. So Prabhupada said, then become with eyes. He said, simply praying, he said, do something practical. Then he walked on.
Left is the back. Fuck the nose.
It is a miracle, isn't it?
He's risen to the occasion.
Yes.
This one. And everything works because
I was just walking with Hare and I was saying that it's a little blurry with me with the years that we were walking. As he said, it wasn't easy to get on the morning walk to Srila Prabhupada. Somehow or other I was able to get on there every time. I don't know how I did it, but I got on there. And so now there was one year, I can't remember the year, but there was one year we were walking through here, and I don't know if it was maybe some others who perhaps were here, that there was that spot we just stopped, the last spot with the lake behind, that Prabhupada was stopped also, and he was feeding, someone had some prasadam and were feeding the duck. Prabhupada was feeding the ducks. And he was giving them prasadam, and they were coming closer and closer, and they were quacking, quack, 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 quack. And then so then so many of them came, quack, quack, quack. And Prabhupada made a funny comment. He said that, see, and some of the bigger ones were pushing out the smaller ducks. So Prabhupada said, see, these ones, they're very eager for the prasadam, so I give them more. So I was thinking, well, it's not fair these big ones pushing out the little ones. What about these little ones? You know, one of the big ones, give them a turn. But Prabhupada actually said the opposite. He said, because they are so enthusiastic and so eager, I give them more prasadam because of their enthusiasm. So then he said, so devotees have to be. The more the devotees are enthusiastic, the more they get Krishna's mercy. And quite often when Prabhupada walked, I remember one time we were walking and Prabhupada was asking about he really liked the Melbourne Botanical Gardens, and he said these gardens are one of the best botanical gardens in the world. And I also remember at that time he liked the Melbourne water. I remember that he liked the Melbourne, just from the tap he said this water is very, very sweet. And he liked the botanical gardens. And he would, you know, as others have been saying, he would walk and chant and then stop. He would often ask about the different trees. And I remember one time he asked, what is the name of that tree? And I can't remember who it was, but someone said, I think it's such and such tree, Prabhupada. He said, you think? You don't know? He said, go over. Because each tree, of course, has got the label. And someone came back. And Prabhupada said that, I think it's such and such. And then the devotee went over and read the Latin, and they came back and said the Latin. And then what is that then? Such and such fig tree or something like that. He said, Prabhupada said, see, you have to know actually, don't think. And another time when we were just coming inside, and then Prabhupada saw all the traffic. You know, it was early in the morning, and you know, a lot of traffic. And actually, he was looking at them, and he made a comment. He said, they are working so hard. These people, early in the morning, they're working, going to work. And then he saw others would, the businessmen would park their car, just like where we were parked our cars. He saw they were parking their cars, and one devotee just told me they're still doing it too. During the week, because it's. Everyone parks their car and they walk in. So Prabhupada saw that. So why are they parking there? What are they doing? And so Prabhupada, they're parking their cars here because in the city itself it's very expensive to park your car. So they park their cars here, so then they just walk into the city. And then Prabhupada made some comment. He said, so just see, they're big men with big cars, but they have to park their car and then walk into the city. Then he gave a story, a Bengali analogy. I can't remember that one. Does anyone remember that? He gave some story in Bengal, just like such and such does this and that. But it was always, it's not, as others have said, it wasn't easy to have personal darshan of Prabhupada. Everyone was trying to, get his association. But, I was privileged to some extent that some or other, I guess because, the book distributors, especially I'm missing Madhavisa here, because, Madhavisa was one of the, he was the big leader of Australia, and Prabhupada was very fond of Madhavisa, and he was very inspirational for all of us. And so I'm sure if he was here with us, he would be able to fill in so many more stories. But he arranged especially for the book distributors to get Prabhupada's association and darshan quite regularly, pretty much every day. I remember going over to his upstairs, to his room upstairs, and to his house when I think it was the year before 70. I wasn't here in 75. I had to stay back in Auckland and look after Radhagiri Hare. Because I'd just been in Mayapur with Prabhupada, and at Mayapur, and then there was a big Pandal program in Hyderabad in 75, and all the devotees went down for that 3-day Pandal, and huge crowds every night, huge stage, and I don't know how many people, a lot of people came, and I remember one question at that time. Someone, I think Chudananda Swami, suggested that Prabhupada, there's so many people here. If at question time they just call out, it'd be very difficult. Maybe they can write their questions. They can write their questions on the paper and hand them, and we'll give them. Prabhupada said, that's a very good idea. So they did like that, and then there was one lady came, and she wrote on the paper, said, Swami, here in India we have, we have many yogis, they can do miracles. Can you do any miracle? And so Prabhupada was, for a moment he was just quiet, and he said, yes. And he said, And he pointed to all us sitting on the stage. He said, before they were addicted to so many sinful activities, now they are very saintly Vaishnavas. This is the miracle. Jai Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Hare Krishna. I had the good fortune of going on one morning walk with Srila Prabhupada in 1976. As Hare mentioned, there was restricted participation in those morning walks, so we had a roster. Prabhupada was here for a week, and every day there was about 10 or 15 devotees. So gradually the whole yatra got a chance to go on a morning walk. I was trying to recall some of those things from that morning walk this morning. One of the things I remember was Yogashrava had his little son, Janaka. Janaka? He was about so big. So for a large part of the morning walk, he had his hand inside Prabhupada's left pocket. Prabhupada was holding his hand. He was just walking along with Prabhupada for the morning walk. And Prabhupada was quite comfortable with that and gave him the mercy. Another thing I remember, I was intently watching Prabhupada's feet because I think I recall reading somewhere that a pure devotee doesn't actually touch the ground. So I was watching Prabhupada's canvas shoes. He had these white canvas shoes like the colour of his chadana. So I remember watching those feet intensely, touching the gravel. And anyway, I couldn't figure it out, whether he was or whether he wasn't. But one thing I noticed about Prabhupada, he was very graceful and very aristocratic when he walked. Always held his head up. His back was perfectly straight. And when he was walking with his cane, he was very aristocratic and commanded our attention. So I wanted to, I can't remember a lot of that morning walk, but I printed a transcript this morning. I'd like to read you a few things from that. Prabhupada touched on one very important point, was anxiety. He received a question from Hare about anxiety. And I think all of us will attest, we're not chasing anxiety, we're chasing freedom from that. But Prabhupada illustrates how we should actually be chasing for Krishna anxiety. So I'll just read you a few things, if you can just put up the impulse. So Hare asked the question, the devotee is only unhappy to see others unhappy. Does this ever cease? Is a devotee always unhappy because of this? Prabhupada, yes, how to deliver them? This is Krishna anxiety. This kind of anxiety is welcome. Yes, is that? Oh, devotee. Yes, is that also in the spiritual world like this? Yes, in spiritual world there is everything, but only central point is Krishna. Here anxiety is, where shall I get money? Where shall I get woman? And there is anxiety. And there is anxiety. How shall I get Krishna? The anxiety is there. That is the difference. Here all people are anxious how to get money and how to get woman, that's all. And there the anxiety is how to get Krishna. The anxiety is there, but quality is different. Devotee. If we're in anxiety that we cannot perform devotional service nicely, is that all right? Prabhupada. That is devotional side. Krishna anxiety itself is the first-class devotional service. If one becomes anxious like that, then he is perfect. Janma koti shukritaya na labhyate. After many, many millions of lives of pious activities, one can get such anxiety. This is not easy. To become anxious of Krishna, you don't think it is like ordinary activity, anxiety. If one becomes full of anxiety for Krishna, that is the highest stage of perfection. Devotee, we are in the neophyte stage and we're often falling down. Prabhupada, you don't imitate, you follow the rules and regulations. Don't try artificially to be anxious. When you are purified, then you'll get that anxiety, not artificially. Then you are sahaja. No, anxiety that will come, the perfectional stage. Don't try to be perfect artificially. Perfect stage, we have to follow strictly the regulative principle, the injunction of the spiritual master, Shastra. Then you come to that stage. Don't artificially imitate. So a bit of a break there. So Krishna says, anxiety for oneself is maya. Prabhupada says, that is material. Krishna, and anxiety for Krishna, that is spiritual. Goswami Shloka Krishna Bhakti Rasa Bhavita Mati Kriyatam Jadi Kuto Pi Labhyate. The anxiety of a Krishna. If it can be purchased, immediately purchase it. Rupa Goswami said, Krishna Bhakti Rasa Bhavita Mati Kriyatam. Just purchase Krishna anxiety if it is available somewhere. So the next question will be, what is the price? Tatra loyam api mulyam ekalam. That anxiety can be purchased by anxiety. So I'll do it. No, janma kuti sukriti na labhyate. That anxiety is not available even by millions of births of pious activities. So this anxiety is not easy. That is Krishna anxiety. If you become anxious how to worship deity, how to dress nicely, how to do, if you remain, that will develop your anxiety for Krishna. Therefore, deity worship is essential. Exactly in time to get up, to offer Mangalarati, to dress. This anxiety is the beginning of Krishna anxiety. Then when you become perfect, you'll always be anxious for Krishna. And that is the perfectional stage. Therefore, by the injunction of the Shastra, regulated, it is a way of creating that anxiety. So we must follow. Then we'll come to the real anxiety. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
I first met devotees in 1970, start of 1970 in Sydney. At that time I was working in Sydney as an actress, and then I had a plan for a big career in England. So I sold everything and packed up everything, and I was flying via Los Angeles to London. And then in Los Angeles, I was staying with some companions who were in the same line. And then I had somebody inadvertently, when they heard I was going to America, had given me a gift of a fountain pen wrapped up in some blue cloth and taped with some sticky tape. And they had asked me, would you give this to Srila Prabhupada? So I had said yes, because I would just drop it off at the temple and be on my way. But when I went to the temple to drop that off in Los Angeles, I had I would say a life-changing experience that caused me to want to stay there for some time and see if I could actually adjust to this lifestyle. And so I stayed. So then after that, I had a 6-month visa. So when my visa expired, I was wondering what will happen, because if I come back to Melbourne, because I'm from Melbourne originally, if I come back to Melbourne, I will forget everything, because I'll see my family again. Because I was so far away, I could make these extreme changes, but once I come home, it will all dissolve. So, but Krishna had his plan. So before leaving Los Angeles, by a very informal, casual system or non-system, an arranged marriage was decided upon with somebody who I had never met. And all I knew about them was that they played the mridanga. And in those days that was quite significant news. So he was in Japan and I was supposed to go to Hong Kong, and we were supposed to meet in Hong Kong and marry in Hong Kong. So we went through with it, and I went to Hong Kong and we married, and it was very, 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 very difficult, because of course we were cross-culturing, cross-religioning, except that we were Hare Krishnas, and we were in a foreign country where we knew nothing about the Indian culture, nor the Chinese culture, nor anything. So it was quite challenging. But after about a year, maybe less than a year, we got our own place, and that was also not without difficulty. And then Srila Prabhupada was supposed to come to Hong Kong, and Bali Mardan was our GBC at the time. And then one day, I remember a letter came, or a telegram perhaps, I think it was a letter, saying that because our centre was not very well set up, Srila Prabhupada had decided not to come to Hong Kong. And that was the straw that broke the camel's back. I said, that's it. I'm leaving. This is all too much. This is ridiculous. I'm leaving. Where's my mother? So I went into my room and I started a letter to my mother saying, you know, I'm ready to come back to Melbourne. This is all impossible. So my husband came in, was very worried that, I'm about to lose my newly formed marriage here. So he said to me very quickly, and I think probably when I reflected later, I would have calmed down after breakfast, and it would have probably just been another normal day. But he was quite worried, and so he took it very seriously, and he said, well, why don't you write to your mother and get a ticket and come, and you go to Australia and see Prabhupada rather than because he's not coming here. So I was very excited, and I wrote the letter, and within days my ticket arrived. My mother agreed, and my ticket arrived. And I found myself all packed up and off to Sydney. So this was in 1972. And Bhavi was there in Sydney. She was painting the deities to go to Auckland, or they were perhaps even already painted. They were in one of the rooms of the house in Surrey Hills. And there were many devotees there at the time. It was very dynamic, and we were staying there, preparing for Srila Prabhupada's arrival in Sydney. And Mohanananda was in charge of the temple. He was a red-headed, little bit wild American who I had known in Los Angeles, so we had a friendship, so he would give me a little privilege here and there. So I was in his office with others when the telegram came to say that Srila Prabhupada had been refused access to Singapore. And so his dates and times had changed. And in fact, the date and the time was written when he was arriving in Sydney. And when he looked at it, it had already gone, meaning that Srila Prabhupada had already actually arrived in Sydney. And everyone became a great panic because he was already at the airport and there was nobody there to greet him. Nothing was ready. The temple room was full of flowers, still making garlands, and it smelt of fresh paint. And everything was like a mad last-minute rush anyway, and he was on the way. And so one of the devotees said, quickly, let's go out. And there was a car waiting for Srila Prabhupada. So they started putting flowers in the back of the car, marigolds in the back of the car for some unknown reason, to go to the airport. And as we were sitting there, I remember I had the marigolds and we were putting them in a little line. A taxi drove up. And it was really extraordinary because there was this sudden flash of saffron in the ordinary colours of the ordinary Sydney streets as they opened the door and Srila Prabhupada stepped out. And I had my hands full of flowers, and then I was like, oh my gosh, I've got to get into the temple room and see him. So when I saw him, all that happened was I just burst into tears. And I was crying and crying and crying, holding these flowers, and I dropped the flowers and ran into the temple room, and everybody was preparing for his arrival. And I remember I saw that the shoes were still on the Vyasa-san. So I went forward and I took the shoes off the Vyasa-san. I was holding them to my chest and I was crying. So Srila Prabhupada was looking around and he said, who is this? I was like, oh no. And somebody there, perhaps Mohanananda, said, oh, this is Burijan's wife. And Prabhupada's eyes got very big. And he looked all around the room and he said, oh, is Burijan here? And I said, no, Srila Prabhupada. And he looked at me and he said, you're here alone? And I said, because you get very nervous with him. He was so great. And yes, Srila Prabhupada, I'm here by myself. And then he's sitting on the Vyasa-san, right, looking very, very regal. And he puts his head to the side and he looks at me and he says, oh, you haven't been fighting. And without spontaneous, you know, when your wives know this and you're in the corner, tell a lie, you know. No, Prabhupada, no, we haven't been fighting, everything is nice. And then I thought, my gosh, I've just told Prabhupada a lie. Because I was always fighting. And I was sitting there holding onto these shoes thinking, my spiritual life is over. I've just told this terrible lie in front of a whole temple room and the deities and Prabhupada. And then I was completely confused by that point. And then Srila Prabhupada looked at me and he said, because I had said, no, we're not fighting. And he said, good. He said, husband and wife should not fight. No, like, yes. Like, highly purified. And then he just looked and in a much more relaxed way, because he was playing. I realized later he was playing. It was rasa, exchange of love, rather than a formal chastisement. So then he said, just like in India, he said, you know, there is Gandhi. He had a big fight with his wife, and he told his wife, get out. And he said, and she left the house, and she went right to the edge of the house where the fence of the gate was, and she sat there. And then later he came down and he said to her, what are you doing here? And she said, I have nowhere to go. So then he said, husband and wife fighting is not a very serious thing. And it was so amazing because I went through this whole emotional cycle of like, I lied to him, you know, and now he's telling me this story about Gandhi, and I'm like, I'm really in trouble. And then he just dismissed the whole thing as very light, and he was very affectionate. So Srila Prabhupada had his own psychological ways of because it was more than psychology, as we've spoken of people having prayers or thoughts and then Srila Prabhupada responding verbally to them. So it's far more than psychology of a psychologist or an outward person, but within his dealings there was so much expertness in psychologically making a point that you ended up being able to digest in a suitable way that was suitable for who you were and on what level you were actually practicing. So this is something that I always remember as a very special exchange that I had with him. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
When Prabhupada was talking, he reminded me of something about morning walks and Prabhupada walking on air. Not much is said about Prabhupada's mystic powers, but there's quite a bit of evidence that, you know, now and then he did display them. But one god sister of mine, she was on a morning walk and she was walking on the sand with Prabhupada. Everyone else left footprints, but Prabhupada left no footprints. And when I was in India last year, Pankaj Jungari was talking about how he was watching Prabhupada go up an escalator one time, and he was coming up the escalator, and when he get to the top, he just kept going. So, yes, Prabhupada was not an ordinary person. She was very, very special.
Who's this with the head there? That's no good. You've done it on the phone. Why'd you do that?
Big smile. Srila Prabhupada, 40th anniversary king.